Welcome to another episode of Courageous Me. And this is an episode I promised because we have got the incredible marketing gal and founder of Chris Communications, Abi Gatling here. Now, I actually was a guest on Abby's podcast, quite a few months ago, but I just reshared the episode that we recorded together on my podcast with the promise that I would bring her on here because quite frankly, right, Abby is one of those super creative human beings. And I want to know where that's come from. Like, is that something that you grow up with or is that something you develop over time? And I'm a really big believer in courage and creativity, both being really important human skills. And she's got both nailed. So let's find out about her courageous story. So, Abby, before we do know a little bit more about you, can you share what excites you to have a conversation with me today about courage?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yeah, I'm so looking forward to this conversation because, firstly, I love chatting with you, Kim. Thanks for being on the podcast a couple of months ago. Um, but secondly, I was thinking about the topic of this podcast and I was thinking, life gets so busy and we're running a million miles an hour, and quite often we forget to stop and breathe and actually just take stock. We forget to look back and see where we've come from and the journey and the steps that we've taken to actually get to this point in time. And I think because of that, we are missing out on giving ourselves kudos and, pats on the back and actually acknowledging the things that we have done well to get to this point. And this might be a generalization, but I think us as women, especially, that we just take everything in our stride and we feel like everyone can just do what we're doing because it comes so easily to us. But so that means that we miss these opportunities. And this is just a wonderful opportunity to do that, to stop, to reflect. And I love the fact that it is celebrating all these courageous acts from all these different women. And, if you hear more about it, then it's going to inspire other people to do the same. So I think it's fantastic.
And it's so true. And you know what's so interesting is so many women, when we do go back and say, even those that I've had on the podcast, and they get to listen back to their own story, which for some I've got to really encourage them to do. They've got to find the courage to actually hear themselves being interviewed, that's another story. But what they often say is, oh, yeah, but that wasn't really courageous. That was just what I did, or that's just who I am. It's like, yeah, but that's the beauty of this, that the thing that you take for granted is gold or inspiration to someone else. So being able to share that and not to just go, oh, that's me, and just discount it is a really, really courageous thing to do. So,
Oh,
so,
yeah, I
so
agree. I
Abby,
agree.
and so tell me a bit about you. Where have you come from? Because yes, we'll get to what you're doing now and how creativity comes into it. But where have you come from, and where's one moment back as far as you want to go where you've had to really reach in and find some courage?
Yeah, I don't know. And this certainly comes into what we're saying. We always downplay, we downplay what we're doing, but courageous acts can be small or big. They don't have to be massive leaps every single time. But I think like one of the most courageous things that I've done recently was actually starting my business, Crisp Communications. It's not that I think starting a business is necessarily courageous in itself. I mean, there are so many scary things that go along with it. You're giving up potentially a regular paycheck and you're having to put yourself out there, like all that stuff. All that definitely takes courage. But I think for me in my journey, it was my opportunity to actually back myself and put myself first. And I hadn't been doing that for a long, long time. And I probably took too long to take the step to work for myself. But I just kind of needed that little push to get over the line. And I think that was my courageous act. Yeah.
Why did you say that you don't think you've backed yourself in the past or put yourself first? Where has that, say, played out? And like, why would that have been something that you mentioned? Because that's really common.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're so slow to act sometimes. I think we get really comfortable in the now and we just go, oh, better the devil you know, of like what's happening in your immediate surroundings. But the backstory for why I started the business was, I was I had a really great career. I was getting promotions. I was earning lots of money.
What were
Working.
you doing?
I've done a few different things. Working for the government, working for university sector, community outreach, investigations. Like doing a lot of things. I'm a very generalist person. I have lots of skills in different areas. I don't think I'm a specialist in any one particular area. And that is a downside for me. And the reason I mention it is that when I am good at something, I'm like, cool, this is what I should be doing. And then I go, oh, I'm good at this. Oh, cool, I should be doing that. And so it allowed me to sort of float and go with the flow with my career because I was good at all these things. So I thought, oh, I'll just keep doing it. But it really wasn't serving me. And after a bunch of really, really tumultuous years where I just allowed myself to be passive and go with the flow, I just like woke up and I just realized, my gosh, I'm not that happy. I'm not that happy with what is happening. And so I did some soul searching and I thought, I think it's because creativity is missing from my life. Creativity was such a big part of my life growing up, throughout my entire childhood. And then at this one particular point, something happened. I stopped and I didn't do it. And it changed my career path completely. And that's how I got into all these other weird and wonderful things that I was doing.
Can you
And
share what that one thing was? Because now you've got me
oh, I got
intrigued.
you intrigued.
You have. It's like, then
Yeah.
you're not getting away without going back there.
Yeah, so I have a super super creative family. I'm from a massive family. I have 5 brothers, 2 sisters, and every single one of them, including my parents, are just wonderful creative beings. So I grew up in this lovely bubble of being encouraged to try things out and test and express ourselves freely, and I love that. And so how that played out for me was artistically. So I really loved the art side of creativity, and I did it right the way through school. And uh, I got all the way up to year 12. And in Queensland, it used to be that your year 11 and year 12, the last 2 years of school, everything you do counts towards that one last score you get, and that score you get determines whether you go to university or not and what course you can get into. So I was working away, doing really well, scoring very highly. I'm a very hard worker, always had pretty good grades. My last semester of year 12, my art teacher changed, and the new art teacher came in and just did not like me at all.
Anyone not like you?
There was just something happened, and I received the first ever fail of my life. And I know it sounds stupid coming back like, oh, school fail. Like, it sounds so trivial. But when you are 15, 16, there's so much emphasis on the last couple of years of school. It's like, this will determine the rest of your life. And then I received this fail and I struggled to get back. I was able to resubmit my work, and I managed to climb back up, but I never got back up to the A's that I was on it before. And it devastated me. It absolutely devastated me. And it stopped me from doing anything artistic for about 10 years, I'd say, after that.
And can I just ask, right? Because I was someone who didn't like art, wasn't good at art, never pursued it other than what was compulsory. Because art is very subjective, right? Or appreciating art. How does a teacher fail you in art? Like, can you give me more insight into that? Like, was it was it art theory, or how did you fail?
It was like a combined piece. So it was art prac, so an actual physical piece of artwork alongside some art theory. And I did a little bit better in the theory, but it was mostly the art prac that I just got annihilated by this teacher. And I never had that before because I'd always scored really highly with my, in all of my art classes. So I was absolutely dumbfounded by it. And the same thing was like, yeah, like this is so subjective. You clearly just don't like what I'm doing. So I don't know, there's some bee in a bonnet, but it basically, the result of that was that I lost all my confidence in that space. I shut down and I completely changed the career path that I was going to go on. I thought I was going to be a graphic designer or an interior designer, or I just had these ideas of I wanted to do something that was like purely artistically creative, and I didn't. I had no idea because I literally, this was the last semester of school. I had no idea what I was going to do. So I went to the career counselor at school. He wasn't very good and just said, "Oh, just do teaching. Everyone, if you don't know what you're doing, just do teaching as a good fallback. You're going to get a job at the end. It's not that hard to get into. You'll still get into it with your current grades." And so that's what I did. And so I studied teaching. And then I realized like working with kids wasn't for me at that time. I was like 17 out on prac, trying to wrangle all these kids, still not that happy with what was going on. I just didn't have the passion for it. So I changed to adult education. I got into workplace training. I got into investigations. And then I went into the university sector. And it kind of just spiraled from there.
Yeah, wow. I can imagine when you've had your heart set on something. And can I ask, you said you come from a large family that are all creative. How did that feel as well from a family perspective, knowing that you were creative, but yet you failed art? How did that play out?
Yeah, I don't remember there being a huge amount of family pressure around the artistic side of things, but certainly on the academic side of things. Like we are all very academic and we've all done really well. We have a very hard, strong work ethic. So I think we all had done pretty well in our own way at school. I was very grateful that my family was so supportive, but it really does put me on a completely different path to what I thought I was going to do.
Absolutely. Oh, completely understand. So you've gone down this other path and you're sort of job hopping to try and find what builds you up. And then when was the moment when you realized fruit, like what's lacking is creativity? When did that happen? And was it a moment that then allowed you to start your own business? How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, so when I realized I was, like deeply unhappy with work, um, and I tried to fix it, and I don't know how I came up with the idea of creativity being a thing. I just don't know how that came. That just came to me maybe like when I was sleeping, and so I was like, okay, my issue is not that my issue is not that I'm working in this terrible toxic work environment and the culture and the workload. It's not that. No, it's creativity that's the issue. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do my best. I mean, I can't start from the beginning. I've already worked my way up the ladder. I'm earning enough money. I've got a great job. I'm permanently employed. I have a permanent job. I can't be fired. I was like, it can't be that. No, no, no. It's creativity. So I was like, okay, I can't change everything now. I'm just going to try and squeeze as much creativity into my current job as I can. So I tried to do that as much as possible. I was trying to inject design things, and I was, I was like, we need an email newsletter. I'll do that. Oh, we need this, and I was like putting my hand up for all these, making these projects up, putting my hand up for them, and doing them, and just trying to squeeze as much as I could in. And then when I realized I couldn't do any more of that, I decided to look outside of work as to how I could get my creative fix. So I went and I taught myself graphic design. And then I took an internship with an American famous blogger, managing his social media. And then I got a couple of clients running their socials. And I was doing all this stuff outside of work to get my creative fix because my day-to-day work life was awful. It was awful. And that sort of kept me going for a little bit. And it was keeping my happiness just above, normal. And it got to this point where I couldn't sleep and I wasn't very happy, and my relationships were struggling because I was using all my energy just to try and survive. So I sort of was shutting down from my family and not seeing my friends and stuff like that. I remember this one time I was staying up late and I was watching Netflix by myself, drinking a glass of wine, and I was watching this show called 7 Days Out. It was like this 6-part series on Netflix, and it was 7 days out from these key events in life and how people prepare for them. So it was like 7 days out from this dog show and how everyone preps for it, like the contestants, the people running the thing, how 7 days out from this other thing. And it was just so interesting. I love it. I love the logistics of things. Anyway, I was watching this one. It was 7 days out from the end of this 30 or 40 year NASA project where they had some satellite out, and it was after 30 or 40 years, it was coming back to Earth, and this entire project was going to be disbanded, and all these people were going to not work together anymore. And so there were themes of like camaraderie and people loving working with each other and working towards this common goal and creative thinking and lateral thinking. And I was watching it. I just realized that I had these tears streaming down my face. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And I just realized, like, oh my gosh, everything that is happening on this show is what I'm missing from my life. Like this desire to do better, working in a fantastic environment, working towards a common goal, being celebrated for having good ideas and any ideas, like no good or bad ideas, it didn't matter. And I just sort of had this light bulb moment where I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I have to
Wow.
do what's right for me, and what I'm doing now is not right for me. And so I made the decision and I just stopped.
So, oh my gosh. And that literally is your body showing you what's going on. It's talking to you right through the tears, saying the reason why you're connecting with this is really highlighting that what you've not got, you need to go find. So when you say you just stopped, did you resign straight away, or tell
Yeah.
me about that? Because this is glorious.
Yeah, I did. I did. I
Did.
just resigned. And I just said to my husband when he woke up the next morning, I'm going to resign today. And he was like, okay. And then full transparency, I had my long service leave up there, and I was like, that's going to give me enough of financial buffer to try this out. I'm going to see it and see if it works. If it doesn't work, I'll go find a job in 12 weeks time or whatever my long service leave was going to cover. So I quit, got my money paid out, and then I started Crisp Communications in 2019.
Wow. So it's not like Chris had even been, percolating away in your mind or anything. You've literally resigned, and then Chris came to.
Yeah, well, I suppose I'd been doing that freelancing and stuff on the side. That started around 2017. So this is a long thing. That's what I was saying. Like, I let it go way too long. And someone had said to me once, like, it was my friend who's a psychologist, and I told her this story, and I was like so emotional because it just happened, and we went out for dinner with them like the weekend after, and she said to me, first your body whispers, and if you don't listen, then it screams. And so, yeah, my entire closing down and feeling so terrible and trying to squish myself and shrink myself, that had been my body whispering to me, like giving me the signals this is not right for you. And it wasn't until I having this like crying, like random crying at something that's so insignificant, that was my body going to me like, hey, okay, I'm gonna start ramping this up unless you start listening to me. I'm gonna start screaming at you now. So I guess Crisp, it wasn't called Crisp, but it had been happening since 2017 of me doing all these things to get creativity, and then 2019 was me formalizing it and putting it out officially into the world and saying, hey, I'm here, I'm ready for business.
And did you find that because all of this had been happening behind the scenes for so long, almost preparing you for this moment, albeit you not knowing that this moment was going to be at this time when it happened, but did you think then when you did resign that and other people might see this as courage, but for you, it's like this just felt like the right thing to do. So it didn't feel like, oh my God, that nervousness we get when we do think of courage, like when we think of, jumping off that cliff or, going and doing something completely different. Did it just feel quite natural for you?
Yeah, I just felt like I had let myself I'd let myself play second fiddle for so long, and I was like, you only get one life. Now is the time to put myself first. And so Chris was putting myself first. So when I started, I was like, I'm gonna make this to be everything that I was missing from my career. I'm gonna make it pink because I love it. I'm gonna call it crisps because I love potato chips. I'm gonna set up I did everything I was missing. I was like, this is my opportunity to build the absolute perfect thing for me. So I knew it was right. I knew it was right from day one. That doesn't mean that the people around me thought that. Like, people thought I was crazy. I had a permanent, lifelong job at the university, and I was giving up a regular paycheck, and people thought I was insane. People thought I was insane for doing that. I had so many people saying, like, are you sure this is the right thing to do? Especially because they knew I wasn't in a good place mentally because of this whole thing that had happened. They're like, are you making this rash decision when you're not actually in the right mindset? I was like, no, I'm doing it. And
Well, it wasn't a rash decision, was it?
yeah, it was
been percolating for donkey's years.
Yes, I know. I feel like it was slow, but it was also fast. You know what I mean?
Others looking in.
Yes.
And I don't know how much your husband knew about how you were feeling, and your husband, Michael, who's a very good friend of mine too. But, when you wake up one morning and say, oh, by the way, I'm resigning today. And was he expecting that? Or even though for you, it was kind of like, this is just inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he probably was expecting it at some point because he knew how unhappy I was, but it didn't. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was happy with it. You're like, hey, I'm just gonna give up my income now. But he knows that once I get an idea in my mind, I will follow it relentlessly, and I will pursue it until I succeed. So he was obviously scared about it, but he also trusted me explicitly that I was going to make it work.
Oh, and so you've got him trusting you and supporting your decision, but you've got, most importantly, you've got you having your own back, and you've got a little bit of money that you get from your long service leave. And as you said, if all else failed, you can always go and get another job. Like that, as much as that's probably the last thing you ever wanted to do, that would be the worst thing that could happen. And that's not so bad. I mean, yes, horrible, but
Yeah.
It's not life or death kind of worst.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I knew I had lots of skills, and I could go get, go with a recruiter or something. I knew that I could do that, but the idea of that was so awful in my mind that I was like, I'm not going to let that happen.
I remember when I got one of my first business coaches after I had left the corporate world after 20 years, and I'd been out on my own in a partnership with a guy for 3 years, and I was went on my own. And I remember the first session of a coaching program I'd signed up for with this coach. And the first thing she said to me was, why wouldn't you go back to the corporate world, right? Why would you do this? And I said to her, no kidding. I said, because if I did, I'd actually feel like I was sticking needles in my eyes. And she said, okay, yep, I get where you're at. Let's go.
Yeah. But it's good to have people question you like that sometimes, because it really checks that you're doing the right thing. Because if you can answer so confidently and so emphatically like that, then they're like, okay, cool, I know that you're doing this for the right reason, you've thought it through. So I think it's confronting to get questions like that, but it's also so great because it was really affirming as well.
Totally. So you've not just decided to quit your job with the nice paycheck and everything. You've gone out on your own. What I loved most, though, is firstly that you've said, I'm going to build the business that I want that gives me all of the things that I'm not getting. Like, that is glorious, because that's not what drives some people to start their own business. Some of it's, I feel I can do better, or I can earn more money. I'm not going to be capped. I've got skills that are being unutilized. You're like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it my way, even to the point of saying you love pink, which I'm a pink lover. Even Chris, you like potato chips. Is that how the name came about?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with potato crisps. My nickname as a kid used to be Spud, because I love potatoes so much. But and I'm obsessed with crisps. Crinkle cut original Smiths. That's my go-to. But I was like, I've just not put myself first for so long. I'm just gonna shove everything in that I love, and I'm just gonna make this the funnest and best experience. And so then I was like, okay, I got to reverse engineer crisp. It actually came about like quite well, because I was like, crisp, oh yeah, crisp communications, clear. It's, no fuss with it. It made so much sense.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, totally. Like there's a lot of dimensions to the name that all marry in with you what you're doing. How did you therefore, so you've gone in, you've started Cripps, you're creating this thing that you want. So I know that, it's kind of like the person that likes baking cupcakes. They decide that they're going to build a business baking cupcakes, and they end up losing the joy of baking cupcakes because the seriousness of running a business then takes over and completely squishes any of that main driver for doing it in the beginning. How's that panned out for you? So you've got all these ideas of things you love. You've obviously got to translate that into commercial reality, and you've got to build a business, right? You're not just doing it as a hobby or for fun. How did that kind of pan out, and how's that journey been for you? And where has courage had to play a role?
Yeah, it is true that, if you start doing something you love and you start exchanging it for money, it can take the shine off it pretty quickly. And it was an interesting thing for me to kind of experience, because I went from having this life completely devoid of creativity to then having this day-to-day life where I had so much creativity around me, and I had so many opportunities to express myself creatively. Um, and I actually found myself towards the end of 2022 feeling really kind of creatively burnt out. And because I was, people coming at me from all angles, and they're paying you, they expect you to have an idea just like that. And a good idea like that, a creative idea like that. I was feeling just kind of a little bit burnt out, giving too much out and not putting enough back in. And my podcast actually came out because of that, because I had gone over to America to see my brother Joseph, and he's a wonderfully creative person. He's a games designer. And I loved just talking to him about his process for games design and how he manages the creative team. And I spoke to him for about 45 minutes, just like picking his brain about this stuff. And by the end of it, my energy had shifted so much from the beginning of the conversation to the end of the conversation. I was like, wow, I feel like I want to get out there and do it now. I want to get out there and create again. And I realized that it's having creative conversations is what fills up my cup again, and and allows me to continue to create. So after that holiday, I decided, yep, I need to start the podcast, so I have legitimate reasons to talk to creative people, and have more of this in my life, so I can keep my creative energy going.
I love that. And your podcast called Creativity Uncovered, right? So again, I totally understand. It's funny, isn't it, how, and I know even with this podcast called Courageous Me, it was all about courage. And I had this conversation with a woman when I was buying mugs as gifts, and there was 4 words. One of them was courageous, but I said, which word resonates with you most? She said, oh, courageous, because don't we all need a bit of courage to go and, do things that make us happy? So just back on that note, where I guess if you are, and any creative graphic designers I've ever worked with, they might come up with ideas, but if I'm the client and I'm paying the bill and I don't like it and I'm not going, how does that work for you? Because there must be times when you've had clients that have come to you with an idea and you're thinking, oh my goodness, like you're going to squish my creativity because I'm just taking an order or doing a transaction, or you're going to come up with something and think it's amazing and they're going to go, yeah, no. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that over time I have built I have built my sense of self as a business owner and as a creative and as a marketer. So I'm now courageous enough to not work with people who make me feel like I'm being squished or taking an order. So that's a good thing. I've fired clients along the way because, if they don't, like, I'm a firm believer of you hire people who are professionals and good at what they do, and you get out of their way. That doesn't mean you don't collaborate. That doesn't mean that you have a partnership. I think that's so important. But there is no point hiring someone like me to do your marketing and then to micromanage me 100% of the way. Like, you could just get a junior person in your team and just push them around. Do you know what I mean? I don't encourage that for sure. But if you want to set the direction yourself 100% of the time and you don't want to listen to the experts out there, then outsourcing to an agency like mine is just not the right way to go. But it took me a long time to get to there. Like, I don't think I fired my first client till 2021, probably, after working since 2019. And now I've such a clear sense of how I want this to feel, because I keep going back to why I started Crisp. This is about making the best possible business that is fulfilling every single need of mine for my work life. And as soon as I start feeling like I used to feel in my last career, unvalued, pushed around, exploited, as soon as I start feeling like that, I'm like, nope, that's not entering the Crisp sphere. You're out, mate. Goodbye.
Oh, I like that. You're not entering the Crisp sphere if this is the way that you're making me feel. So very much listening to what's going on inside you and using your intuition to make decisions about who comes on board and who doesn't.
Yeah.
So how do you then, like, given that you're getting paid to be creative, how do you keep your own creativity fueled? Like, how do you keep yourself, being able to spontaneously, maybe not instantly, but spontaneously bring ideas to the table and always keep those juices flowing? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, the podcast has been a huge part of that. Like, having these conversations, I feel so energized by the end of it. It's fantastic. But also just having creativity at the front of my mind now. Like, now I'm always looking at people like, oh, they'd be good for the podcast. Oh, they'd be good. This is a great book I could talk about. It's just really put it at the front of my mind. And so instead of, like, some people think that you've got this limited, finite sort of amount of space in your brain, and one thing comes in, the other thing gets pushed out. But actually, you can keep adding more to it, and it becomes more expansive if you do it in a, good, sustainable way. And I think the podcast for me has allowed me to expand my capacity. I'm no longer in survival mode. I'm like in this thriving mode. And so it's made me want to do more of my own creative stuff. So I'm doing more of my own creative work outside of Crisp in my own life. And that then is feeding back into my creativity at work, which is then, I'm now delivering even better results for my clients because I'm satisfying my personal creativity through the podcast and my own creative works, and not just doing creativity on demand, if you know what I mean.
Oh, totally know what you mean. So what else? So besides the podcast, you said you've got some other things that you do outside in your personal life that are creative. What are they?
Yeah, so I'm like a very explorative, creative person that I don't necessarily I don't necessarily need to have an outcome. That I love just playing in the space. So, I might start a painting, or I might start doodling. I had someone on the podcast who talked about the benefits of doodling, and now I'm drawing every day. Just little funny things that come into my brain, just something very tactile like that. But it's also, just thinking about, like, the things that are not so good in the house, putting my brain towards that, and problem solving these things, and just trying solutions for fixing stuff around the house. Because creativity is not just about artistic endeavors. It's really like a way of thinking and problem solving, and yeah. So I'm just like, that's annoying me. How am I going to solve that? And I think about it, and a couple of days later, try it out. Lots of DIY, lots of gardening. All of that really fills my cup.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I must say that when I finally realized that creativity was more about problem solving than it was about art, that's when I suddenly thought, huh, that's interesting. How can I bring more of that into my world? And actually, I am really good at that. So I think, and I know you and I had that conversation on your podcast. So given that your podcast, Creativity Uncovered, brings all these different people with different perspectives on creativity, what's one or two things that maybe someone has shared that has shifted or been quite an aha moment for you in respect to creativity?
Mm. Yeah, so there's so many nuggets of gold that come out of these conversations, and everyone has a different perspective and a different experience with creativity, and it's just wonderful. But one of the things that keeps coming up, like a recurring theme that comes up in these podcast episodes, is that the idea of creativity is a really natural thing, and humans are naturally creative. And so there's all these links between creativity and nature and the environment. And so a lot of people have said that your creativity can go in seasons, just like seasons of the year. They're seasons of your creative life. And so you may have times where you are being super creative every day and you're doing it, in this particular way. And then you might have a day where you're sort of like going into winter slumber time and you may not be doing it so much. Then you might be in a growth phase, and just the fact that everything's cyclical and what's happening today is not necessarily what's going to happen tomorrow. And it doesn't matter if you're not being as creative today, because just like the seasons is just going to keep progressing and you're going to keep evolving. And it's really interesting. A lot of people have spoken about that in different ways. And I just find it to be a really fascinating concept.
That's so beautiful. And what about this is something that, and maybe this is something personal to me, but I can't schedule time in my diary to be creative, right? So I can't say that at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, I'm going to sit down for 2 hours and be creative. I typically find that creativity comes to me when it wants to. And one of my favorite books on this whole topic is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, that it is like a butterfly that comes and lands on you, and the idea, and you can either run with that or that butterfly is going to go, well, if you're not going to, I'm going to go to someone else. How do you sort of manage that then, where you're just not feeling creative, and maybe not even a season as in a full season, but maybe it's just even seasonal in terms of the hours of the day? How do you manage to have to do something that's creative, but literally like looking at a page going, yep, no, nothing's coming?
Yeah. And I think this is sort of like what we spoke about before, like when you're being creative purely for self-expression, or when you're being creative in exchange for money as part of your career. It changes it all. So the first part, you can wait for it to strike, creativity to strike whenever it feels like it, and you can choose to act on it at that point or not. But when you're doing it as part of your career, as part of your work, you actually have to come up with these tools and strategies to get creative when you have to be creative. And for some people, it is scheduling in time, and just even if you don't have, even if you schedule in some time and you don't use it creatively, but you just give yourself that space to potentially be creative, and it might not come about, but at least you're like, I'm giving myself permission to have this time to be creative if I choose to be creative. So that's one way of doing it. But other ways is just finding what inspires you and knowing that. And sometimes it's good to have more than one way to inspire you. So you can tap into that when you need that little bit of a creative boost. So, I get it from the podcast, but I also know that when I move my body and I turn my mind off it, then I can get creative as well. So might take the dog for a quick walk around the block. You think about it before you go, you turn your mind off while you walk, and it'll just come to you halfway through. There's so much in the subconscious. We actually had someone on the podcast who was talking about dreaming, and how dreams is basically your body doesn't know when you're asleep and when you're not asleep, and you can use your dream time to help work through creative blocks. And she trains people on how to do that, where you sort of listen intently, no, you think intently about this creative issue that you're having, think about it really intensely before you go to sleep. And then you go to sleep and your brain will just keep working on it when you when you're having a nice little nap. And but the second part is that you have to train yourself to remember what you've dreamt about. And if you can nail that, then you can start to, tap into this wonderful extra resource that we never would normally use. So there's a bunch of different ways, and it's all about testing, what works for you, and testing and trialing, and there's so many different ways to doing it. It's an interesting thing to talk about.
Oh, it's fascinating. And there's a beautiful book called The Net and the Butterfly where they actually talk about this, and they talk about it also from, a brain plasticity perspective, and how, when you sort of stop that executive function, which is that think, and just let it sort of go, but you've planted the seed and then allow it to kind of percolate. Whereas so often, particularly in roles where it's not so traditionally creative, even though it is from a problem solving point of view. But, I've done a lot of work for 30 years in financial services, and I'll often get people saying, oh, but I'm not creative. It's like, well, you are. You might not be a good drawer, but you are creative. But it's like, but when they sit down, it's like, I've got to find the answer now. And I had a woman actually just call me the other day, and the question was, I just feel like I'm getting a bit bored with what I'm doing. I've been doing the same thing for so long and whatever. And I said to her, don't try and force it, but before you do go to bed, like in those sort of hours where you're getting a little bit tired, just brainstorm, just anything that comes out, just put it all on a piece of paper, but don't try to find the answer. Just get it all out, then go to sleep. And then let the natural, exactly what you just said, whether it's dreaming or just, what goes on in our brains, let it sort of run around and connect dots and that, because you've planted the seed. And I have to follow up and see where that's landed. But it was just such an interesting conversation. But even that takes courage, to have the faith, knowing that, as you said, you've put all the serious stuff in, now let creativity take over.
Yeah, it's true. And having faith that it will work and you will come across creativity again is important, because as soon as you start to get really stressed about it, your body is going to go into that, fight or flight mode, and it's going to start protecting itself. And rigidity and that sort of closed-mindedness is the opposite of creativity. So you need to try and make sure that you're like, goose frabba, just chill, because then it'll be more likely to strike you, rather than if you're stressed about it not happening on your time schedule.
And when you're someone that needs an answer and I need it right now,
Yeah,
having that courage to allow that process, that's another ball game. So just in terms of your business, you've been running your business, it's going great guns, giving you what you need. I love that you've had the courage to sack clients where it hasn't felt like the right thing. What's the next courageous step that you need to take, or where have you got to really reach in and find some more courage for the next phase, personally or professionally?
Yes. Well, I think I had I had this time professionally. It was last year. I was invited along to do a presentation, and I love presenting. I trained as a teacher. I did workplace training. Very comfortable. I used to present at the university, present at orientations in front of 3,000 students. I used to do it all the time. And then now I don't do it as much. I work for myself, but I've been trying to look for opportunities to do that, in my community, workplace training, stuff like that. I did this strategy session. I was invited along to do a strategy session with a group at an education facility. And I was so excited. And I went there and I kind of flipped out. A little bit. I got really nervous. My throat got all choked up. I was suddenly really aware that these guys are all, you know, educators. They do this for a living. And I was like, who am I? And I was really like sad after that, because I was like, they obviously didn't notice what was happening. I've got a pretty good game face, but in my thought, I was like the duck on the water, like chill. And then underneath, like, paddling really quickly. And afterwards, I was like, oh my gosh, that was really weird and awful. And I don't like the fact that I had this skill and I've lost it because I haven't practiced it enough. And so professionally, I'm like, I need to not let this scare me. This is something I love doing. I need to get back out there and do it. So I think on a professional front, I'm going to force myself to go out and find more opportunities to practice this skill, because I hate the idea of letting fear beat me in this area. So I think that's going to be my next courageous step, is that my goal is to present at a conference or something where there's a couple hundred or a couple of thousand people, and just do it, because I know I can, and I can't let this fear hold me back.
But isn't that beautiful? Because especially speaking in front of people, and I know that is for some people probably one of their biggest fears on the planet, but it's something that you know you can do. But when you haven't been doing it for a while, you lose some of that confidence around doing it. So acknowledging that, going, I need to get back up there. I need to get back on those stages and actively pursue. And that takes courage to do, because when you have lost your nerve or you've lost some of that confidence, it's not like you're going back to where, you last left off when you were speaking regularly. So yeah, that is courage. What about in your personal life? Where have you got to reach in and find a bit of courage?
Yeah. Well, when I started the business, I for some reason I thought that like having my own business would actually help me achieve better life balance. That I was, when I was working and I had crazy hours, I was working a lot. I was highly, highly stressed, and I was like, no, I was trying to start my own business. This is going to be all on my terms. Newsflash, no, it's not like that when you run your own business. It's hard to stop and say, draw a line in the sand and say, that's enough for today. So I think in my personal life, I need to be courageous in setting better boundaries and starting to focus more on me and my family. I've built this great business. I've ticked my creativity box, but now I need to start reclaiming those parts of my personal life that had sort of slipped away during my career and during running the business, and focus more on that. So that's kind of scary, because as a business owner, you want you want to be available and present and all that for your clients, but you also have to prioritize yourself. And I think that's scary to me, but I think that's what I need to do this year as well.
And Abby, if I was to look at, all the episodes I've done on this podcast too, that theme is really, really common, where a lot of particularly women, they're out there, go, 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 giving everything to everyone else at their own expense. And actually yesterday, I just interviewed a woman who's a cardiologist who, they work stupid hours, and especially in all of their training and that. And yet they're medically trained to understand the benefits of sleep and rest. And it just doesn't happen. But, and it does take courage. It does take courage, because in order for you to look at what you need and what your needs are, they might not be working on the business or, doing the next thing you need to grow or what have you. And I was actually listening to a masterclass this morning, and one of the first things this woman said was that sometimes to grow your business, you actually have to work less, not more. And she was talking about all the psychology behind, the hustle and the grind, and the hustle and the grind, and how it increases your stress. And then the more you hustle and grind, the more stress increases, which more limiting beliefs show up. And I sat there going, go figure. And that takes courage to think that slowing down or doing less is actually going to be what's needed to take those next steps of growth, and very much along the lines of what you've just said there. So what's one thing you're going to do over the next couple of weeks off the back of this conversation for you, not the business, for Abby?
Well,
a declaration to everyone that you're making.
I'm going on holiday. Actually, I'm going on
Where?
holiday, and I'm nervous about telling my clients. I'm nervous about telling my team. I mean, I have told them, but there's just this constant thing of like, if I'm not available, will they wait for me? But you have to be confident. You have to be confident in yourself and just be like, I'm human. I'm allowed to take a week off. And if my clients don't want to wait for me, then that's on them. That's not on me. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a holiday and I'm not going to check my emails.
And having the courage to actually tell your clients, hey, I'm having a week off.
Yeah.
And if any client does not approve, which by the way, you don't need their approval, but if they're not your Chris kind of client, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly
Feeling
right.
feel guilty
Exactly.
on a holiday. No, not for a week. Like seriously, not for a week.
So that's
Oh,
that's
Abby.
what I'm doing.
So if people want to learn more, obviously they can go to the Creativity Uncovered podcast. We'll obviously put that in the link. Where else could they go to find out a bit more about you, follow your journey? If they want to know more about your work, where should I direct them?
Yeah, I reckon my website, which is crispcoms.co, that is a good place to start. So on there, we have all the stuff that we do here at Crisp, but also my articles that I write just about marketing in general and business ownership and things like that. Plus the podcast is on there too. And always, reach out if you'd like to get in touch. I love the community of business owners. Yeah, I love the community of business owners and I just love having those connections and conversations. So yeah, please do reach out.
And what I love about your podcast, even though it's called Creativity Uncovered, you don't have to be an artist or someone that's into that kind of creativity. Just you get so much benefit. There's so many pearls of wisdom, and it really shows what a huge role creativity plays in our life. And good on you for being courageous enough to move from work that you didn't love to building something that one lights you up from many, many angles, but that helps so many others at the same time. Absolutely love. We could talk forever, Abby. Thank you so much. And here's to you having a guilt-free holiday.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.